If you're going to the US, be prepared. It could cost you an extra $250.
Well, millions of travelers coming into the U.S. will now be subject to a new $250 visa integrity fee.
It began as a number small enough to be ignored, bureaucratic enough to seem harmless. $250, the so-called visa integrity fee, signed quietly into effect in July 2025. No protests, no headlines, no televised debates, just a new line on a federal form. And yet, within months, that number started rewriting the rhythm of American life. You could feel it first in the silence, the kind that slips between storefronts, fills once crowded streets, and leaves an echo where laughter used to live. In Tucson, hotel receptionists stood behind empty desks. In New Orleans, jazz spilled from fewer doorways. In Miami, waiters folded napkins in half-lit restaurants waiting for guests who never came. Something invisible was draining the color out of the country's most vibrant corners, a quiet exodus of global travelers who simply chose to go elsewhere. For decades, the United States didn't have to beg for attention. The world arrived willingly. More than 75 million international visitors a year filled its hotels, funded its festivals, and gave texture to its identity. But since that fee appeared, arrivals from non-visa waiver nations have fallen by almost 40%. The numbers sound clinical, but their meaning isn't. Behind every percentage point are people, the housekeeper in Spokane now driving delivery trucks, the souvenir seller in Chicago closing his family shop, the Brazilian exchange student who canceled her Disney internship because the added cost exceeded her savings. The logic behind the policy was straightforward. Strengthen national security, filter out fraudulent visa applicants, make foreign travel pay for itself. Yet in practice, the outcome has been economic self-harm on a scale few foresaw. In tourism-dependent cities, where every guest supports a network of cleaners, drivers, chefs, performers, and guides, the chain reaction was immediate. Jobs vanished, small businesses folded, and tax revenues that funded schools and parks evaporated. Economists call it a micro-shock. But for those living it, it feels more like a slow collapse. In Tucson, international visits dropped 32%, nearly $400 million gone from the local economy. In Spokane, seasonal resorts cut operations by half. Kansas City, once counting down to the World Cup with optimism, now fears losing $200 million in foreign spending during the event itself. And beyond the spreadsheets lies something deeper: identity. For cities like New Orleans or Los Angeles, tourism wasn't just money, it was character. It was the sound of different accents blending into one street corner, the aroma of 20 cuisines in a single block, the energy that made locals feel their home mattered to the world. Without it, even daily life feels thinner. This isn't the first time a policy decision has reshaped America's social landscape, but rarely has it happened so quietly. No hurricanes, no pandemics, no global wars, just a form fee. And yet that single line on a document has turned into a national stress test. How resilient is a country when its soft power stops at its own border? The answer is now playing out in empty hotel lobbies, quiet airports, and half-booked festivals. Economists describe it as a liquidity drain of culture, where the flow of people, ideas, and revenue all dry up together. Locals feel it viscerally. Fewer shifts, quieter nights, higher prices as businesses scramble to survive. The irony? The U.S. wanted to protect its borders. Instead, it may have walled off one of its greatest exports, its openness. As night falls in Tucson, the last desert tour van returns with only 3 passengers. The driver glances at the quiet street and shakes his head. It used to feel like the world wanted to be here, he says softly. Now it feels like we told them not to come. End quote. Our caster. What began as a technical adjustment has become a cultural turning point, one that reaches from government spreadsheets to the heartbeat of local diners and street performers. And if the pattern continues, the silence that started in a few forgotten corners may soon echo across every American city that once lived off the world's curiosity. In the months following the introduction of the $250 visa integrity fee, economists began to notice an unusual pattern spreading across the national data charts. It didn't look like a crash. It looked like erosion, slow, steady, and largely invisible to those outside the tourism belt. But for the millions whose paychecks depended on travelers, the change hit like a wave that never receded. The Bureau of Economic Analysis reported that by late autumn 2025, foreign tourism revenue had dropped by more than $38 billion, a fall steep enough to ripple through transportation, hospitality, entertainment, and local manufacturing. To outsiders, it was a statistic. To people like Maria Lopez, a restaurant owner in Miami's Little Havana, it was survival. We didn't lose our customers, she says, adjusting the close sign on her cafe door. We lost the world. Let's stop laning that grang-differentiating dottage raver. In cities where tourism once acted as the heartbeat of daily commerce, every dollar spent by a visitor generated up to 7 more in local activity. When that heartbeat slowed, it wasn't just hotel owners who felt the pain. It was taxi drivers, florists, musicians, and even teachers whose schools relied on local tax revenue. Tucson alone saw nearly 7,000 tourism-linked jobs disappear within 4 months. Orlando, dependent on international students for seasonal staffing, had to shorten park hours for the first time since the pandemic. The domino effect revealed the deep interdependence of America's service economy. One canceled tour in Los Angeles meant fewer film permits, lower food truck sales, and empty shifts for the freelance interpreters who once guided groups from Seoul, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo. A decline in bookings in New Orleans left brass bands playing to empty courtyards, their tips reduced to pocket change. In Kansas City, hotel owners who had renovated ahead of the 2026 World Cup were now drowning in loans. Their expected foreign clients never arrived. For decades, tourism had been America's quiet engine, generating over 9 million jobs and 1 in every 10 export dollars. It wasn't glamorous economics, but it kept small towns alive. The visa fee turned that engine into a sputtering machine. Economists warn that once a destination loses momentum in the global travel market, it can take years, sometimes decades, to rebuild trust and visibility. Travel habits harden, explains analyst Raj Patel. Once tourists reroute to Canada or Spain, they rarely come back. The human cost grows harder to quantify. In Spokane, resort owner Ethan Marsh laid off 12 of his 30 employees. He now washes sheets himself. His wife handles reception. We thought it was temporary, he admits. Then the bookings stopped completely. Their story mirrors thousands of small businesses that never made headlines because they didn't collapse all at once, they simply faded. Even large corporations are adjusting strategies. Airlines have reduced routes to secondary airports. Cultural events that relied on sponsorships from tourism boards have been postponed indefinitely. The once booming student exchange market has slowed by nearly half, cutting off a pipeline of labor that sustained rural and mid-sized towns. The temporary fee, officials argued, was a negligible addition to travel costs. But for citizens of developing countries, it was a decisive deterrent, an invisible wall built out of bureaucracy and expense. As the months passed, the effect took on a moral dimension. Local residents began to realize how much of their community's identity had depended on foreign presence. The energy of a cafe conversation in mixed languages, the sight of a Brazilian family in Disneyland, the thrill of showing a European visitor your hometown gone. The U.S. had not only lost revenue, it had lost its reflection in the world's eyes. In Kansas City's downtown market, a vendor summed it up simply: when fewer people visit you, you start wondering if you still matter. In mining 80 action and miting our 80 die-in. The domino continues. Empty rooms become empty shifts become unpaid mortgages. And behind it all lingers the bitter irony. A policy meant to secure America's borders has instead exposed how fragile its open-door prosperity truly was. What disappears first in an economic slowdown is never just money, it's atmosphere. The texture of daily life, the rhythm of exchange, the invisible hum that comes from thousands of interactions between locals and strangers. When the tourists left, that hum faded too. And in cities like New Orleans, Chicago, and Los Angeles, that silence carried a strange kind of grief. In the French Quarter, bar owners used to measure time by sound. The brass bands in Jackson Square, the clinking of glasses along Bourbon Street, the laughter spilling from balconies. But now, the evenings come and go with only the low vibration of passing streetcars. It feels like a movie set after the crew left, says Camille, a trumpet player who now drives for a delivery app. The lights are still here, but the story stopped. Every cultural ecosystem, from street performers to jazz clubs to art markets, depended on the constant arrival of outsiders. International visitors didn't just buy tickets, they validated the city's identity. They reminded locals that their traditions mattered beyond state lines. When the stream of visitors thinned, self-worth became another casualty. A local tourism report shows that international attendance at major festivals fell by 43%, forcing organizers to cancel events that had run for decades. "You can't fund culture on hope," one festival director said bluntly. Chicago, once a magnet for global architectural enthusiasts, now finds its famed river tours half empty even during summer. The city's cultural confidence, as one sociologist put it, has taken a blow. Architecture guides who once narrated in multiple languages now rotate between gigs, taking part-time work in cafes. The disappearance of those accents, Spanish, Mandarin, Italian, has turned the cityscape quieter, more homogeneous, less alive. In Los Angeles, the consequences have been creative rather than commercial. Film schools that used to draw aspiring directors from across Asia have seen application numbers drop by nearly 50%. International workshops, once vital for the city's creative exchange, have paused indefinitely. A small acting studio in Burbank that thrived on visiting students from Seoul and Mumbai now survives through online classes. It's not just a business loss, says its founder. It's a loss of imagination. Mixturing, mazing, making, mating round the res. Cultural economists often describe this phenomenon as soft recession, when GDP doesn't fully capture what's being lost. The meals not shared, the friendships never made, the art that won't be performed. America's openness used to be part of its brand. The idea that anyone could arrive and belong even for a few days. Now that brand feels faded. Meanwhile, other nations are stepping into the void. Canada, for example, saw a 28% increase in Latin American visitors. In the same period, the U.S. experienced its decline. European cities are offering visa simplifications and cultural incentives, actively courting the travelers the United States turned away. When one country builds a wall, noted a London tourism analyst, another builds a welcome sign. The emotional undercurrent inside the U.S. tourism workforce is one of quiet mourning. From street artists in New Orleans to tour guides in Chicago, many describe their work as not just a job, but a dialogue, a daily exchange of stories, smiles, and curiosity that now feels one-sided. "We didn't just host tourists," said a guide in Los Angeles. "We hosted the world's dreams." Today, those dreams have gone elsewhere. And what remains is a nation grappling with an unexpected identity crisis. How do you measure loss when what's missing is the world's presence? If the first wave of the crisis destroyed jobs and the second hollowed out business, the third has eroded something far less replaceable, the sense that America still sits at the crossroads of culture. The French Quarter's muted horns, Chicago's half-empty boats, and Hollywood's dimmed classrooms are not isolated symptoms. They are signals that the United States is turning inward without realizing it. A quiet truth hangs in the air across all these cities. When the world stops arriving, you start losing pieces of yourself. The crisis had evolved from local despair into a national embarrassment. The tourism decline was no longer a quiet inconvenience. It had become a reputational wound. Foreign media began publishing reports with headlines like "America is no longer worth the paperwork," and "The land of the free now costs $250 to enter." In London, travel agencies started labeling the United States as a high-barrier destination. In Tokyo and Sao Paulo, influencers once known for glamorous New York or Miami vlogs began showcasing Lisbon, Toronto, and Seoul instead. The damage wasn't only to image, it was to trust. For generations, the U.S. had built an identity around openness, a nation whose airports were gateways to opportunity, art, and adventure. Now, those same airports felt like fortresses. Lines at customs grew longer, entry interviews became harsher, and for many travelers, the extra $250 felt like an unspoken message. We'd rather you didn't come. Cities that had already cut budgets to survive were now slashing deeper. Kansas City's World Cup Committee quietly revised its revenue forecast downward by $210 million, fearing empty seats and lost sponsorships. In Orlando, the hospitality union reported its worst employment figures since the pandemic, with nearly 1 in 5 tourism workers either laid off or relocated to other sectors. Miami's hotel occupancy rate dropped below 60%, numbers unseen since the 2008 financial crisis. But behind the charts was something more human: fatigue. Local business owners had been told to adapt for 18 months, find domestic customers, pivot to digital marketing, or embrace regional tourism. None of it replaced the scale of global travel. You can't replace a French honeymoon with a weekend staycation, said one Florida hotelier. They don't spend the same, and they don't bring the same energy. Sociologists now describe a subtle psychological shift taking root among Americans who work in tourism. Pride has turned to frustration. Hospitality has turned to resentment. When global visitors dwindle, service economies begin to look inward and often downward. Tips shrink, morale falls, and an industry once powered by smiles starts operating in survival mode. Meanwhile, neighboring countries are learning from America's mistakes. Canada and Mexico have launched joint visa waiver initiatives, openly courting travelers deterred by U.S. bureaucracy. Their marketing slogans sound like pointed contrasts: no hidden fees, no walls, just welcome. Airlines are redirecting routes, and hotel chains once anchored in Las Vegas or Los Angeles are investing in Vancouver and Cancun. The global tourism map is quietly being redrawn, and the United States, once the gravitational center, is drifting to the margins. What worries economists most is not just the financial fallout, but the long-term erosion of influence. Tourism, they argue, is one of the purest forms of soft power. People visit, experience a country's values, and carry those impressions home. When fewer people come, fewer hearts and minds are touched. The world's familiarity with American kindness, creativity, and openness, the intangible currency of global goodwill, begins to fade. The irony deepens. The visa integrity fee was introduced in the name of national image to signal that America valued security and accountability. Yet, in practice, it has broadcast something else entirely: insecurity. It has told the world that the United States is afraid of being taken advantage of, that it trusts no one without a surcharge. The human story is cut deeper than any spreadsheet. In Los Angeles, a Thai filmmaker describes how she postponed her first trip to Hollywood because the visa cost made her project unaffordable. In Chicago, a French architecture student canceled a long-awaited internship, choosing Copenhagen instead. In Miami, a Colombian family turned back at the last minute, their savings falling just short of the combined fee. Each absence is invisible, but multiplied by millions, it reshapes a nation. And so the American tourism sector finds itself trapped in a paradox, desperate for visitors, yet responsible for pushing them away. The longer the silence lasts, the more permanent it becomes. Tourism, wrote one columnist, is like music. Once the applause stops, it's hard to start again. I think that termy and devoted fresh test. The global audience has moved on to other stages. Now the United States stands before an empty theater, asking whether its policies can ever rebuild what its pride destroyed. The silence had matured into something heavier, not a crisis, but acceptance. Across the United States, cities that once pulsed with the rhythm of arriving flights now move at half their former speed. The hotels are still standing. The lights still flicker on every evening, but the hum that once made them feel alive has faded. The $250 visa fee had done what even recessions and pandemics couldn't. It changed the world's emotional relationship with America. On the surface, the nation looks the same. Times Square still glows. The Hollywood sign still gleams. The French Quarter still smells of rain and bourbon. Yet behind every postcard image lies a quieter truth, the sense that fewer eyes are watching, fewer footsteps are echoing, fewer stories are being written here. In the simplest terms, the United States stopped being a global meeting place. For many who work in the tourism industry, the consequences have become deeply personal. Taxi drivers in Orlando now drive only half their usual shifts. Street performers in New Orleans joke that they play for ghosts. In Tucson, a family-run souvenir shop that survived both the pandemic and the 2008 crash finally closed this winter. The owner, an elderly woman named Elena, left a note taped to the locked door: "We lasted 70 years. But a city without visitors is like a song with no listener." Economists now estimate that nearly 1 million tourism-related jobs have vanished nationwide, most of them belonging to small business owners and immigrant families. For every lost paycheck, there is a ripple effect. Rent unpaid, medical coverage cut, children pulled from school programs that relied on city funding. It's not just an economic contraction, said Professor Allison Grant of Georgetown University. It's a contraction of connection. Meanwhile, America's global competitors are cashing in. Canada, Spain, and Australia have all reported record-breaking tourist numbers since late 2025. Airlines that once prioritized U.S. routes now pour their capacity into Toronto, Barcelona, and Sydney. Even regional trade fairs, once held in Las Vegas, are migrating abroad. As one executive put it, the world hasn't stopped traveling, it's just stopped coming here. The cultural loss, however, runs deeper than economics. For decades, America defined itself not only by who it was, but by who it welcomed. The exchange of languages, foods, and ideas wasn't a byproduct of tourism, it was a quiet engine of innovation. When that engine stalls, creativity follows. In Los Angeles, film festivals that once debuted international directors now struggle to fill panels. In Chicago, the Museum of Contemporary Art has reduced its foreign artist exhibits due to dwindling sponsorships. Even in universities, the drop in international students has thinned out diversity that once fueled campus debate and research collaboration. The long-term danger isn't only about lost revenue, it's about isolation. Nations don't close themselves overnight, they fade into disinterest. What begins as a border policy becomes a mindset. The fewer people who cross a border, the fewer who understand the country behind it. And when understanding fades, misunderstanding grows. The U.S. now faces a question far larger than tourism. What kind of country does it want to be seen as? A fortress that charges entry, or a crossroads that celebrates arrival? Rebuilding trust will take more than repealing a fee. It will require a restoration of spirit, a return to the generosity that once defined the American welcome. Some cities have begun fighting back. Chicago launched a campaign called Open Again. New Orleans reinstated its global jazz scholarship to attract young musicians from abroad. In Miami, community leaders are lobbying Congress to suspend the fee for developing countries. These may be small steps, but they signal a larger realization. America cannot thrive in solitude. And perhaps that's the quiet lesson hidden beneath the statistics. The world didn't turn away because it stopped loving America. It turned away because it stopped feeling loved by America. As night falls again over the empty riverboats of Chicago and the still streets of Tucson, the question lingers in the air like a low, unfinished note. Can a nation that once defined openness find the courage to reopen its doors? If it does, the world will return not just for the landmarks or the lights, but for something rarer, something America itself is starting to miss, the feeling of being part of a shared story.